Welcome back to our channel, where we calmly unravel the profound truths hidden behind the glamorous facade of entertainment history. He was the ultimate teenage idol, trapped inside a meticulously crafted television persona. Millions adored him, yet his future was entirely owned by network contracts. So, he made a ruthless calculation. He refused to let the entertainment machine consume his adulthood. This is exactly why home improvement star Jonathan Taylor Thomas walked away from Hollywood. He did not become a tragic casualty. He became the architect of his own reality, trading the loud illusion of celebrity for the absolute, sovereign control of his own fate. Reflecting on his silent burden is deeply moving. Please share any untold facts below and kindly forgive any minor errors. We would also love to know your location and time while watching. Now, let us step back in time. The chaotic roar of the American entertainment press faded as Jonathan packed his bags in 1998, stepping off the Los Angeles studio lot for the final time. The transition was absolute and severe. He traded the stifling, manufactured heat of Hollywood for a calculated geographical and psychological relocation. The anonymity he sought represented immediate liberation. If you asked anyone in 1995 who controlled the youth demographic of global entertainment, the answer was universally condensed into three initials: JTT. As the sharp-witted middle child Randy Taylor on the phenomenally successful ABC sitcom Home Improvement, he entered the living rooms of tens of millions of viewers every week. Simultaneously, he provided the voice for young Simba in Disney's The Lion King, attaching his vocal identity to one of the most profitable animated properties in cinematic history. By his 16th birthday, he possessed the wealth, industry leverage, and global recognition that veteran actors spend decades attempting to secure. Yet, in 1998, while perfectly positioned to transition into a Tier 1 adult leading man, Jonathan executed a maneuver that left the entertainment industry deeply confused. He stepped off the pedestal. He refused to participate in the series finale of the television show that had built his empire. He dismantled his own public persona and walked away into the absolute obscurity of normal life. Hollywood did not reject him. The industry was actively preparing to monetize his transition into young adulthood. Jonathan proactively rejected Hollywood. His choice defied the standard celebrity narrative, unfolding instead as a radical act of self-preservation. The traditional trajectory of the child star is notoriously grim, often characterized by a desperate clinging to fading relevance. The magnitude of Jonathan's departure becomes painfully clear when contrasted with the path of his on-screen older brother, Zachary Ty Bryan. Zachary spent his post-sitcom years attempting to leverage the ghost of Home Improvement. When the industry naturally moved on, the inability to let go of that former identity led to a well-documented public unraveling. Zachary's adult life became a sequence of legal battles, including multiple arrests for domestic violence, severe alcohol abuse, and involvement in a multi-million-dollar cryptocurrency fraud scheme. He gripped the fading illusion of celebrity until it destroyed his reality. Jonathan took the opposite approach. He recognized the systemic pattern of the entertainment industry, an environment designed to mine the youth, charm, and energy of child performers, only to discard them when their commercial viability shifts. Instead of waiting to be replaced, Jonathan seized sovereign autonomy. He fired the machine before the machine could fire him. One brother held on and lost his freedom. The other let go and saved his own life. The foundation of this extraordinary discipline was laid long before he became a household name. Born Jonathan Taylor Weiss in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, he was not a child who accidentally stumbled into a lucky break. His entry into the entertainment industry was systematic. Following a family move to the West Coast, he entered the Los Angeles talent pool. To navigate strict Screen Actors Guild rules and avoid name duplication, he adopted the professional moniker Jonathan Taylor Thomas. By the age of 8, he was a functioning member of the American labor force. Beneath the sanitized sitcom lighting, 1990s television production operated as a grueling assembly line, demanding industrial-level endurance from 8-year-old performers. Children were required to hit precise tape marks on the floor, memorize pages of rapidly changing dialogue, and execute performances that satisfied adult network executives, all while under the intense heat of studio lighting. Jonathan possessed a chillingly professional demeanor. He spent his early childhood modeling for print advertisements and shooting commercial campaigns for major corporations like Burger King. This was the wholesome factory at work. He was trained to deliver a highly specific, sanitized version of American boyhood. For a developing mind, this environment acts as an unnatural behavioral conditioning facility where basic human emotions are constantly overridden by commercial demands. A tired 8-year-old cannot simply throw a tantrum or ask for a break when thousands of dollars of union crew time are burning by the minute. He learned to compartmentalize physical exhaustion, burying his authentic feelings beneath a rehearsed, camera-ready enthusiasm that adult directors demanded. This premature severing of authentic emotion from physical expression fundamentally alters a child, teaching them that their primary value lies solely in their ability to reflect what society wishes to see. The physical environment of a 1990s soundstage was inherently hostile to natural childhood development. He spent his formative years breathing in artificial fog and standing under massive tungsten lights that pushed the ambient temperature above 90 degrees. Lunch breaks were heavily monitored, often interrupted by studio tutors rushing to cram mandated state educational requirements into brief 15-minute windows. The child was effectively operating on an executive schedule, forced into a relentless cycle of performance and compliance. This relentless work ethic quickly moved him from 30-second commercials to television roles. He secured the part of Kevin Brady in The Bradys, a short-lived 1990 spin-off of the legendary Brady Bunch franchise. While the show did not last, Jonathan's ability to command the camera was undeniable. He possessed an innate understanding of comedic timing and an emotional intelligence that far exceeded his biological age. He was a child operating with the strategic mind of an adult professional. This rare combination of youthful innocence and sharp competence made him the perfect candidate for a new project in development at ABC. In 1991, the network launched a massive talent search for a sitcom built around stand-up comedian Tim Allen. They needed 3 boys to play his sons. When Jonathan walked into the casting room for the role of Randy Taylor, the network executives recognized immediately that they had found their crucial middle child. The contract was signed, the sets were built, and the gears of a massive cultural phenomenon began to turn. The 10-year-old boy was about to be thrust into one of the most intense psychological experiments in the history of modern television, and the clock on his childhood began ticking down. The American television landscape of 1991 was a monolithic entity. Before the fragmentation of the internet and streaming platforms, broadcast networks commanded audiences of a scale that is mathematically impossible today. Securing a primetime slot on the ABC network meant immediate, inescapable exposure to tens of millions of households simultaneously. When Home Improvement premiered, it was engineered to be a massive commercial success, built around the established stand-up comedy of Tim Allen. The premise was standard domestic fare: a clumsy but well-meaning father, a rational mother, and 3 boys representing different stages of childhood development. The structural integrity of the sitcom relied heavily on the dynamic between the children. Brad, the eldest, was written as the athletic, physically dominant teenager. Mark, the youngest, served as the sensitive, often gullible target for household pranks. Positioned between them was Randy Taylor, and it was in this middle space that Jonathan Taylor Thomas fundamentally altered the trajectory of the series. Randy was not written to be a typical sitcom child. As the writers observed Jonathan's capacity for deadpan delivery and precise comedic timing, the character evolved into the intellectual sniper of the Taylor household. Randy became the proxy for the adult writer's cynicism, placed strategically in the mouth of a preteen boy. He was sarcastic, highly observant, and relentlessly critical of his father's frequent failures. Audiences did not just find Randy amusing, they respected him. He projected an adult sharpness through a child's features, offering a level of sophisticated rebellion that resonated deeply with younger viewers while entertaining their parents. The writers began actively tailoring the scripts to match his rapid cognitive processing. While other child characters were handed standard physical gags or simple punchlines, Randy was given complex, multi-layered satirical dialogue that required precise inflection. He had to understand the underlying irony of jokes written by men in their 40s, interpreting cynical social commentary and delivering it with flawless timing. He was carrying the comedic weight of a veteran actor before he even reached middle school. However, executing this specific brand of televised intelligence requires a heavy psychological toll on a young actor. The boundary between the fictional Randy Taylor and the actual Jonathan Taylor Weiss began to dissolve rapidly in the public consciousness. When working 10 to 12 hours a day on a soundstage, a child actor's primary function is to deliver an optimized, highly directed version of reality. Jonathan was essentially operating a complex psychological avatar. The public did not want to meet Jonathan, a boy navigating the awkward realities of actual adolescence. They demanded interaction with Randy, the flawlessly witty, scripted entity. When a child is required to perform a curated version of intelligence and charm on command, the space required for genuine, unmonitored personal development shrinks dramatically. The television set operates as a gilded cage, demanding relentless emotional output while actively suppressing the messy, unscripted reality of growing up. By 1994, this dynamic accelerated beyond the confines of a television studio. The popularity of his character triggered a secondary industry, transforming Jonathan into a standalone commercial product. He ceased being merely an actor and became an acronym, JTT. This three-letter brand became the central economic engine for the global teen magazine publishing industry. The mid-1990s teen idol market was a ruthless, predatory machine. Publications like Tiger Beat, 16 Magazine, and Bop relied on a constant supply of highly idealized young male faces to sell millions of subscriptions to adolescent girls. Jonathan became their undisputed apex asset. His image was heavily curated. The signature center-parted hair, the flannel shirts, the calculated aesthetic that signaled a safe, sanitized form of teenage rebellion. An entire editorial infrastructure was built around dissecting his fictionalized personal life. Editors fabricated his favorite colors, his ideal dates, and his weekend hobbies to feed an insatiable demographic. Every issue featuring his face resulted in immediate sellouts. The psychological dissonance created by this mass fabrication forced a teenager to compete with his own manufactured image. While the real young man was quietly navigating the mundane pressures of high school biology and college entrance exams, his two-dimensional counterpart was supposedly living a whirlwind life of romantic intrigue and curated perfection. He would walk past newsstands and stare at glossy covers, declaring his deepest secrets invented entirely by adult marketing teams sitting in corporate boardrooms. This intense parasocial exploitation effectively robbed him of the right to discover his own preferences, as the industry had already aggressively defined his identity for global consumption. This level of commodification stripped him of basic human autonomy. The sheer volume of attention erected a physical barrier to ordinary existence. Jonathan could no longer navigate public spaces. A simple attempt to walk through a suburban shopping mall or eat at a restaurant required tactical planning and heavily coordinated police escorts to hold back surging crowds. The screaming fans were not malicious, But the physical reality of being mobbed is inherently violent and restrictive. He was a young teenager navigating extraordinary logistical constraints without any actual autonomy, constantly cornered by overwhelming public adoration. This was an era before social media allowed celebrities to control their narratives from a safe distance. In 1995, fame was intensely physical and completely analog. Fans could not simply double-tap a photo on a screen. They had to physically travel to his location, creating hazardous crushes of human bodies outside hotels and television studios. He lived with the constant, low-level anxiety of a hunted asset, knowing that any breach in security could result in a dangerous physical stampede. From a dedicated young actor attempting to hone his craft, he was forcefully converted into a hyper-idealized commodity, packaged, shrink-wrapped, and distributed for mass consumption. Simultaneously, the Walt Disney Company recognized his unprecedented demographic hold and integrated him into their cinematic machinery. In 1994, Jonathan provided the voice for young Simba in The Lion King. This was not a standard acting role. It was an insertion into one of the most profitable and culturally pervasive intellectual properties in cinematic history. His voice was now permanently attached to a global merchandising phenomenon. Stepping into the recording booth offered a brief, vital reprieve from the suffocating physical scrutiny of the television soundstage, allowing him to perform without the relentless glare of stage lights or the obsessive styling of his hair. Yet, the irony of the narrative was inescapable. He was breathing life into an animated prince destined to inherit a massive kingdom, a character arc that mirrored the heavy, inescapable crown the entertainment industry was desperately trying to force upon his own head. Every piece of plastic merchandise, every soundtrack sold, and every theme park attraction subtly reinforced the invisible chains binding him to a corporate empire, transforming his mere vocal cords into a billion-dollar asset. He had inadvertently collected the 4 pillars of power in the young Hollywood hierarchy: a top-rated primetime television series, absolute dominance in the teen idol market, a central role in a record-breaking Disney blockbuster, and a slate of leading roles in live-action feature films like Man of the House, Tom and Huck, and Wild America. The traditional Hollywood blueprint was unfolding flawlessly. The industry had laid the tracks for his transition into an adult leading man. The strategy was formulaic. Ride out the sitcom, graduate through a series of lighthearted teen comedies, and eventually secure dramatic Tier 1 roles by his early 20s. The studio system was prepared to mold him into the next Leonardo DiCaprio or Johnny Depp, expecting him to eagerly accept the immense wealth and status that accompanied the promotion. But Jonathan was paying close attention to the mechanics of the machine. He was not blinded by the flashbulbs. Standing at the absolute center of the entertainment industrial complex, he began observing the adults who controlled the levers. He recognized the transactional nature of the relationships surrounding him. He saw how the system operated on the continuous financial extraction of young talent, and he began to calculate the true cost of remaining on the tracks they had laid for him. The reward for successfully surviving the child star machine was simply decades of indentured service to the adult star machine. The entertainment industry is highly efficient at processing the rebellion of its young stars. When a former child actor turns to substance abuse, public meltdowns, or legal trouble, the Hollywood ecosystem simply adjusts its machinery. The wholesome teen magazines step back, and the tabloid press steps forward. A tragic downfall is easily monetized. It provides a predictable narrative arc of corruption, followed eventually by a profitable comeback tour. The system is built to absorb and capitalize on self-destruction. What the system fundamentally cannot process and what it actively fears is quiet, calculated indifference. As the 1990s progressed, Jonathan Taylor Thomas observed the traditional methods of escape utilized by his peers. He watched other young actors attempt to shatter their sanitized Disney or sitcom images by engaging in forced, highly public acts of rebellion, taking provocative film roles, frequenting the Los Angeles nightclub circuit, or generating calculated scandals. Jonathan rejected this strategy entirely. He understood that rebelling against the machine was still a form of participating in it. Fighting the JTT brand only validated its power. To truly escape, he had to starve the brand of the one resource it required to survive: his presence. In rare interviews from this period, a striking dissonance emerged between the interviewer's expectations and Jonathan's reality. Journalists approached him expecting the rehearsed, cheerful sound bites of a teenage heartthrob. Instead, they were met with a remarkably sober, analytical young man who spoke of the industry with a detached, clinical precision. He openly discussed the ephemeral nature of fame. He refused to romanticize the work, framing it instead as a highly irregular job that offered incredible financial compensation but demanded an unsustainable personal cost. He made it explicitly clear that acting did not constitute his entire identity. The industry had already nailed the lid shut on his future, mapping out a rigid persona before he even had the chance to discover his own authentic desires. For a child star, identity foreclosure is an occupational hazard. Society, network executives, and millions of fans dictate who the child is, what they represent, and how their future will unfold. The individual is placed in a predetermined box, and the lid is nailed shut with million-dollar contracts. Jonathan recognized the onset of identity foreclosure. He saw the JTT persona operating like a parasite, a manufactured entity that was steadily consuming the real Jonathan Taylor Weiss. If he remained on the path laid out for him, transitioning into adult dramatic roles and continuing the promotional grind, he would never discover who he was outside of the camera's lens. He would spend his entire adult life servicing a brand created when he was 10 years old. He did not want to destroy his life to prove he was an adult. He wanted to reclaim his life to figure out what kind of adult he actually was. He craved the mundane struggles of ordinary existence. He wanted the right to fail privately, to study anonymously, and to exercise complete, sovereign control over his own trajectory. By 1998, as Home Improvement entered its 8th season, the internal pressure reached a critical threshold. Jonathan was approaching his 18th birthday. The legal constraints of childhood were dissolving, presenting a narrow window for a definitive exit. He made the decision to step off the moving train. The writers of Home Improvement were forced to engineer a narrative exit for Randy Taylor. They crafted a storyline that felt somewhat aligned with the character's intellectual and independent nature. Randy boarded a plane for Costa Rica to participate in a long-term environmental study program. It was a clean, sanitized television goodbye. Randy Taylor hugged his sitcom parents, walked out the door, and disappeared from the fictional world of Detroit, Michigan. The real-world departure, however, was a severe and agonizing fracture. Leaving a television juggernaut at the absolute peak of its cultural dominance is an act of professional heresy. When Jonathan announced his departure, citing a desire to step back from acting to focus entirely on his education and college preparation, the initial public reaction was a mix of shock and polite commendation. Going back to school sounded like a responsible, albeit surprising, decision for a young star. But the reality behind the scenes was deeply volatile. The cast and crew of Home Improvement had operated as a tight-knit corporate unit for nearly a decade. They had generated billions of dollars in revenue and syndication rights together. Tim Allen, the undisputed patriarch of the production, viewed the cast as a functional family unit. Jonathan's decision to sever that bond prematurely, leaving the show without its most popular supporting character just before the series finale, was viewed by some as an act of profound disloyalty. The tension escalated from private friction to public controversy shortly after Jonathan's exit. While he had stated his departure was strictly to focus on academics, he subsequently fulfilled a contractual obligation to star in the Disney holiday feature film, I'll Be Home for Christmas. To the public, it was just another movie. To the home improvement production team, it looked like a direct contradiction of his stated reasons for leaving. If he had time to shoot a feature film, why did he not have time to finish the final season of the show that built him? Tim Allen did not hide his anger. He openly criticized Jonathan's decision in the press, expressing a deep sense of betrayal and confusion. Allen publicly questioned Jonathan's motives, stating that the cast was left feeling confused and abandoned. The narrative shifted rapidly. Jonathan was no longer the golden boy in the eyes of his television family, and consequently a segment of the industry press. He was the ungrateful child who turned his back on the people who made him a star. This is the exact juncture where most individuals capitulate. Faced with the anger of a powerful mentor, the threat of industry blacklisting, and the intense guilt of abandoning a decade-long partnership, the easiest path is to apologize and return to the fold. Jonathan did not return. He absorbed the criticism, accepted the anger of his colleagues, and held his ground. He understood a brutal truth about achieving true independence. Sovereign autonomy often requires you to play the villain in someone else's story. If you refuse to be exploited, the people who benefit from your exploitation will call you selfish. Jonathan accepted the label of the traitor. He allowed Tim Allen to be angry. He allowed the industry to be confused. He recognized that appeasing the adults in the room would cost him his freedom, and that was a price he was finally refusing to pay. He traded the approval of Hollywood for the ownership of his own life, and he packed his bags. The traditional Hollywood playbook dictates that when a celebrity announces a departure to pursue higher education, the public should view the statement with extreme skepticism. In the vast majority of cases, citing a desire to go back to school is a calculated public relations tactic. It is a socially acceptable shield used to mask a career in terminal decline, a sudden lack of bankable roles, or an escalating personal crisis. Publicists deploy the education narrative to buy time and preserve dignity when the industry has already decided to move on. Jonathan weaponized this industry cliché and transformed it into an undeniable, empirical reality. When he walked away from the epicenter of American television in 1998, he did not retreat into a quiet life of localized obscurity. Instead, he pursued a rigorous academic path that spanned a decade. He replaced the superficial demands of the red carpet with the unforgiving rigors of elite academia. His academic progression was systematic and relentless. In the year 2000, he matriculated at Harvard University. The shift from a Los Angeles soundstage to the hyper-competitive environment of Cambridge, Massachusetts, represents a profound psychological relocation. Harvard does not grade on a curve of celebrity. The institution demands rigorous analytical output, extensive historical comprehension, and a capacity for sustained intellectual labor. Jonathan immersed himself in an environment where his peers were focused on constitutional law, advanced mathematics, and global geopolitical strategy, rather than Nielsen ratings and box office projections. For the first time in his conscious memory, he was surrounded by individuals who valued him for his cognitive output rather than his physical marketability. Seeking to expand this intellectual foundation, he left the American educational system entirely in 2002 to spend a year abroad at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. This geographical move was highly strategic. St. Andrews is one of the oldest and most prestigious universities in the English-speaking world, steeped in centuries of European academic tradition. It is geographically isolated, situated on the remote Scottish coast, far removed from the paparazzi infrastructure that defines London or Los Angeles. By placing himself in this specific environment, Jonathan achieved absolute anonymity. He walked the same ancient cobblestone streets and sat in the same medieval lecture halls as countless scholars before him. entirely stripped of the JTT brand. He was no longer a commodity. He was simply a student grappling with the complexities of human history. For a young man accustomed to automatic applause and sycophantic praise, the unforgiving environment of a rigorous academic institution served as a brutal but deeply necessary intellectual detoxification. Professors grading his essays did not care about his box office receipts or his television ratings. They cared exclusively about the structural integrity of his arguments and the depth of his historical research. Earning a poor mark on a thesis paper provided a strange, exhilarating comfort because it represented a genuine, unvarnished reaction to his actual abilities rather than a manufactured response to his celebrity aura. He was finally permitted to be flawed, to be incorrect, and to quietly rebuild his self-worth from the ground up, using nothing but his own intellectual labor. Reading a 400-page historical text in a quiet library requires a completely different cognitive stamina than memorizing a 20-page television script. He had to retrain his brain to value slow, methodical comprehension over instant, camera-ready delivery. The gratification was no longer immediate. There was no studio audience clapping after he finished an essay on European history, leaving him to find satisfaction internally rather than relying on external validation. This academic odyssey did not end in Scotland. Years later, he transferred to Columbia University in New York City, formally completing his undergraduate degree in 2010. The sheer magnitude of this achievement stands in stark contrast to the typical trajectory of his contemporaries. The decade encompassing his 20s was the exact period when former child stars traditionally experience their most severe crises of identity. His peers spent those years desperately attempting to maintain their proximity to fame. They engaged in highly publicized scandals, signed on for exploitative reality television programs, and clung to the periphery of an industry that no longer valued them. They fought a losing battle against their own irrelevance. During those exact same years, Jonathan chose to dissect history, philosophy, and classical literature. He dedicated his prime earning years to building a fortress of knowledge and cognitive discipline. He understood that wealth and fame are external variables, entirely dependent on the whims of studio executives and public opinion. True sovereign autonomy requires building an internal infrastructure that no network can cancel and no tabloid can dismantle. By the time he graduated from Columbia, he had successfully engineered a new identity. He was no longer the boy who played Randy Taylor. He was an educated, highly disciplined man who owned his own mind. A pervasive misconception surrounds his departure from the entertainment industry. A significant portion of the public and the media assumed that Jonathan developed a venomous hatred for the art of acting, viewing his exit as a permanent, bitter resignation. This assumption fundamentally misunderstands his psychology. He never issued a manifesto declaring a permanent end to his career. He never expressed a hatred for the craft of performance. What he rejected was the systemic enslavement to the mechanics of fame. He refused to be a servant to the industrial complex, but he retained a deep, professional respect for the work itself. This critical distinction was proven emphatically in the 2010s. Years after completely vanishing from the public eye, Jonathan executed a highly calculated return to television. He agreed to make several guest appearances on the sitcom Last Man Standing between 2013 and 2015. This was not a random casting decision. Last Man Standing was the new comedy vehicle for Tim Allen. Returning to work alongside Tim Allen represents the ultimate reconciliation pivot in Jonathan's life. The historical context of their relationship was heavily fractured. When Jonathan originally forced his exit from their previous series in 1998, Allen had been the most vocal critic of the decision. Allen felt a deep sense of betrayal, viewing the departure as an abandonment of the surrogate family they had built over 8 years. The fallout had been public, messy, and characterized by genuine anger. For Jonathan to intentionally walk back onto a soundstage controlled by Tim Allen required immense psychological fortitude. When individuals run away from a conflict out of fear or guilt, they spend the rest of their lives avoiding the source of that conflict. They hide from their past. Jonathan did not hide. He returned to face the patriarch of his television past, but he did so from a position of absolute, unshakable strength. He did not return to the set as a subservient child actor asking for a career revival. He arrived as a fully formed, independent adult. He engaged with Allen not as a rebellious son, but as a professional equal. The power dynamics had shifted entirely. Jonathan did not merely deliver his lines. He leveraged his decades of technical experience to step behind the camera, taking on the role of director for several episodes of the series. Directing Tim Allen is a masterclass in shifting institutional authority. The young boy who once had to hit his tape marks and deliver punchlines on Allen's command was now the architect of the scene, orchestrating the camera angles and directing Allen's performance. It was a profound demonstration of competence and maturity. The crew on set witnessed a man who understood every technical aspect of the production, from lighting rigs to camera blocking, utilizing knowledge he had absorbed quietly during his teenage years. He communicated with the technical departments using precise industry terminology, commanding the floor without ever raising his voice. This level of granular control proved that his time away had not diminished his abilities. He had simply been waiting for the exact right moment to deploy them on his own terms. Operating from the director's chair fundamentally rewrote the historical power dynamic, replacing the vulnerability of a child actor with the decisive command of a seasoned visionary. He guided the comedic timing of his former patriarch with a calm, steady hand, proving that he had not only survived the pressures of his youth, but had mastered the very machinery that once sought to control him. This interaction stripped away the lingering ghosts of their past conflicts, replacing resentment with a deep, mutual professional respect forged in the demanding crucible of television production. By successfully steering the ship rather than merely rowing it, he claimed a definitive victory over the lingering narrative that he was nothing more than a runaway child star. This reunion dissolved the decades-old animosity without the need for performative, public apologies or tearful magazine interviews. The conflict was resolved through the quiet, efficient execution of professional labor between two independent men. By standing shoulder to shoulder with the man who had once condemned his choices, and doing so with confidence and grace, Jonathan proved that his original departure was never an act of cowardice. He did not run away from Hollywood because he was weak. He walked away because he was strong enough to survive without it. The entertainment industry operates on a rigid set of expectations regarding ambition and trajectory. Critics and observers frequently look back at the cinematic landscape of the late 1990s and pose a recurring, almost mournful question regarding Jonathan Taylor Thomas. They ask why an actor possessing such immense foundational fame, proven financial bankability, and sharp technical ability did not ascend to the cinematic heights achieved by contemporaries like Leonardo DiCaprio. They view his incomplete Hollywood filmography as an unsolved mystery, or worse, a failure to capitalize on unprecedented momentum. The failure of a teenage television idol to morph into a dramatic heavyweight usually stems from distinct structural barriers, demanding personal sacrifices Jonathan was unwilling to make. There are three distinct hurdles that prevent a teenage television idol from morphing into an Academy Award-winning dramatic heavyweight. The first barrier is statistical probability. The shift from a widely adored adolescent star to a respected adult actor is the most precarious maneuver in the entertainment business. The industry is inherently resistant to allowing child stars to age. The public forms a deeply rooted parasocial attachment to the youth, innocence, and specific aesthetic of the performer. When that performer attempts to shed their juvenile image by taking on dark, complex, or mature roles, the audience often rejects the dissonance. The failure rate for this transition is extraordinarily high. It leaves a vast majority of former child actors stranded in a professional wasteland, considered too old to play the teenager but too burdened by their past to be accepted as a serious adult protagonist. The second barrier involves the sheer magnitude of his specific brand. The letters JTT were not just a convenient nickname. They constituted a massive, self-sustaining commercial enterprise. His image was burned so deeply into the collective consciousness of the 1990s that it became restrictive. When casting directors and auteur filmmakers evaluated Jonathan for future projects, many struggled to see a versatile, gritty performer capable of carrying a heavy, complex, dramatic narrative. Instead, they saw the smiling face that sold millions of teen magazines and lunchboxes. The cultural footprint of Randy Taylor was so dense that it effectively boxed him out of the independent, experimental films that typically serve as the necessary bridge to mature critical acclaim. The industry had typecast him not just as a character, but as an entire demographic era. The third factor, however, is the most critical to understand, and the hardest for the Hollywood establishment to accept. He fundamentally refused to participate in the required game. Building and sustaining a decades-long, prestige-level cinematic career is not merely a matter of talent and good management. It is an all-consuming lifestyle choice that demands total submission to the star system. It requires participating in a relentless, exhausting cycle of self-promotion. It demands engaging in highly calculated networking campaigns during awards seasons. Most importantly, it requires surrendering nearly all personal privacy to the media apparatus, allowing the press to consume your personal life as fuel for your professional relevance. Jonathan looked at the blueprint required to become a global cinematic icon and recognized the extreme personal cost. He understood that achieving that level of status meant giving up the exact sovereign autonomy he had fought so ruthlessly to reclaim when he left television. He proactively removed his pieces from the board before the industry could dictate his limitations. By choosing to step away while still holding a winning hand, he avoided the inevitable, humiliating decline that plagues so many public careers. His truncated Hollywood trajectory should not be analyzed as a failure of ambition or a lack of capability. It is instead a masterclass in establishing permanent, unbreakable boundaries. He recognized the absolute ceiling of his tolerance for the machine, and he walked out the door before the machine could consume his adulthood. This adamant refusal to engage with the mechanics of fame has only become more pronounced as the technological and cultural landscape has evolved. We currently exist in an intensely saturated digital era, a period characterized by the relentless, desperate pursuit of relevance. The modern ecosystem of celebrity demands continuous, daily output. Former child stars, aging television icons, and forgotten musicians frequently utilize every available digital tool to maintain a grip on the public consciousness. They launch retrospective podcasts to dissect their old television shows, episode by episode. They publish sensationalized memoirs detailing their childhood traumas. They manufacture online conflicts to trigger algorithm engagement, and they aggressively monetize their nostalgia through specialized fan conventions and sponsored social media posts. They fight a daily, exhausting battle against the natural tide of public forgetting. Against this backdrop of desperate digital noise, Jonathan operates as a profound anomaly. He is a ghost in the machine. He maintains absolutely zero public social media infrastructure. He does not possess verified accounts on any platform, hidden or otherwise. He refuses to participate in red carpet events. He does not grant retrospective interviews about his time on network television, and he categorically declines to monetize the nostalgia surrounding his childhood fame. He has completely and effectively opted out of the modern attention economy. He does not sell his memories, and he does not leverage his past to fund his present. The sheer discipline required to maintain this level of digital absence in the modern age cannot be overstated, especially when a single sponsored post could easily generate more revenue than a year of conventional labor. He actively ignores a guaranteed fortune, turning his back on highly lucrative podcast deals, sensational memoir publishing contracts, and the addictive dopamine rush of viral digital validation. While his former peers desperately curate digital avatars to fight off the creeping shadow of irrelevance, he treats the entire digital landscape with a cool, unbothered indifference. This profound restraint demonstrates a terrifyingly strong sense of self, proving that he genuinely does not require the applause of strangers to validate his daily existence. This absolute, unbroken silence has generated a fascinating cultural paradox. The entertainment industry is biologically designed to ignore those who do not actively demand attention. The algorithm favors the loud, the controversial, and the visible. Yet, Jonathan's deliberate absence has achieved the exact opposite effect. The harder he attempts to fade into the background, the more intensely the public fixates on his disappearance. His refusal to play the game has made him an object of intense, enduring fascination. Whenever a paparazzi photographer manages to capture a rare, unposed image of him walking the streets of Los Angeles, often dressed in unremarkable clothing, looking exactly like an ordinary private citizen running errands, those images immediately dominate entertainment news cycles. Internet search trends frequently experience massive spikes with queries regarding his current whereabouts, his occupation, and his lifestyle. His intentional withdrawal has accidentally transformed him into one of the most captivating mysteries of his generation. In a society where everyone is desperately screaming to be looked at, the man who quietly demands to be ignored becomes the most interesting person in the room. His silence is deafening. The public remains deeply unsettled and simultaneously captivated by an individual who tasted the absolute pinnacle of global adoration, wealth, and influence, and decided through empirical experience that a quiet, unremarkable life was vastly superior. He is famous precisely because he aggressively rejects fame. It is a strategic victory of immense proportions. He retains the cultural legacy of a massive star while living the day-to-day reality of a private citizen, completely unbothered by the frantic, shifting tides of public opinion. He secured the ultimate luxury that money and fame rarely buy, the privilege of being left entirely alone. The ultimate proof of his victory over the industry's toxic narrative did not come from a paparazzi lens, but from a genuine moment of family. In July 2026, Patricia Richardson, his former on-screen mother, shared a warm, unfiltered photograph of a recent reunion. Standing beside her and Taryn Noah Smith, the former youngest sibling, was a 44-year-old Jonathan Taylor Thomas. There was no styling team, no artificial lighting, and no promotional agenda. He was simply a middle-aged man smiling radiantly alongside people who genuinely loved him. That single image shattered decades of tabloid speculation about a tragic, reclusive downfall. It proved unequivocally that his quiet life was not a manifestation of trauma, but a sanctuary of authentic happiness. The public narrative surrounding former child actors is almost exclusively framed through the lens of tragedy and loss. Society expects a dramatic downfall. We are conditioned to look for the cracks in the foundation, the public unraveling, and the desperate attempts to reclaim a fading spotlight. When a performer fails to provide this chaotic spectacle, the cultural consciousness struggles to categorize them. Jonathan Taylor Thomas breaks every established metric of this industry standard. He is not a cautionary tale. He is an architectural blueprint for survival. In an industry structurally designed to consume the youth, energy, and sanity of its most vulnerable workers, Jonathan executed the ultimate defensive strategy. By exiting on his own terms, he neutralized the industry's power over his future. This deliberate withdrawal requires an exceptionally rare form of psychological resilience. To abandon a globally recognized identity is to experience a conscious social death. The brand had to be dismantled so the man could survive. He traded the paralyzing isolation of universal fame for the liberating friction of an ordinary life. The entertainment apparatus relies entirely on the illusion that public adoration is the ultimate human achievement. By rejecting this foundational premise, Jonathan disrupted the core logic of modern celebrity culture. He proved that an individual can step into the absolute center of the American media machine, secure financial independence, and exit without surrendering their autonomy to the enterprise. His quiet existence fundamentally threatens the Hollywood ecosystem because it exposes the industry's most fiercely guarded secret, that walking away is not a tragedy, but often the ultimate form of self-actualization. He dismantled the myth that relevance is equivalent to oxygen, demonstrating that a fulfilling, rich human experience exists far beyond the artificial boundaries of a television screen or a movie premiere. By refusing to play the tragic victim or the desperate comeback kid, he denied the media apparatus the dramatic narrative it craved, leaving them with nothing but the baffling image of a deeply contented man. He remains a definitive example of the power of saying enough, choosing a private reality over the endless demands of eternal fame. Success in the entertainment industry is traditionally measured by visibility, wealth accumulation, and perpetual relevance. Jonathan redefined this paradigm by prioritizing total ownership of his own existence. His final legacy is not defined by a forgotten teen magazine cover, but by the radical assertion of personal boundaries. He did not lose his career. He actively exchanged a synthetic environment for an authentic reality. He no longer needed the world to tell him who he was.